So often today, America faces the challenge of helping to prevent conflicts overseas, fueled by these very divisions of race and ethnicity and religious differences. On Saturday, I am going on a mission of peace to the Middle East, still embroiled in such conflicts. We cannot meet these challenges abroad unless we have healed our divisions at home. I'd like to say something personal. A lot of these old-fashioned, almost amazing arguments against the capacity of black Americans were still very much in vogue during the civil rights movement in the 1950s and the 1960s. And for children like me who were taught that the civil rights movement was the right thing to do in the South and who engaged in countless arguments against inane statements. You have to remember, we were raised in the generation right after World War II, and everyone recognized that everything about World War II in our minds was ideal and perfect and insurmountable and unsurpassable. The one stopper that any Southerner had in a civil rights argument was the Tuskegee Airmen. They will never know how much it meant to us.
I never thought about going into the service. I really didn't want to fly, basically, growing up. I just wanted to be an engineer. I like to take things apart and whatnot, and one day I took the clock apart on the mantle, a beautiful clock. I had it behind the sofa on pieces. I forget how old I was, and my mother caught me. And my mother never hit me, but she had the word, "Wait until your father gets home." I said, "I can put it together." "No, leave it alone." She made me leave it alone. My father came home, and I remember her saying, now, "Eddie, look what George did." And he looked at that and looked at me, and he said, "You know, Alma, I think he's going to be an engineer." And he picked up the pieces, put the clock up on the table, and he put the pieces together, and I sat there. And I enjoyed him just talking while he's putting the pieces together. Going through school, I took science courses and majored in math in high school. I grew up in South Philadelphia. I saw the racial problems and whatnot, and just had to deal with them. South Philadelphia is just like most big cities. We have sections, racial sections. And I went one block to the west and one block to the north to Walter George Smith School. It was an all-colored school. We had those sections like that in Philadelphia. That was one block to the west and one block north. Went there for the first elementary school through 6th grade. Then for junior high school, I went 2 blocks east and 1 block north. Predominantly a white school, Italians and Jewish kids. That's when I went to junior high school. Then I went to South Philadelphia High School, about 8 blocks south of us. It was predominantly Italian and Jewish kids. So only 281 in my graduating class, only 5 of us Afro-American. I learned to deal with it, particularly when I got to junior high school, because they're predominantly whites in the junior high school. So I learned to get along with them as best I could. I hung out with the Jewish kids and a couple of Italian kids. We go all the way through there. And that's one reason why I took 3 years of Latin in high school. Because the white kids I made friends with when I first started, they were in Latin, so I kept taking Latin. In 1941, June of 1941, I just finished 11th grade in high school. And I had an older brother. I love my older brother. I grew up with him. But suddenly, he and 2 of his friends joined the Navy. And my father, joined the Navy. Both of the services were segregated, but the Navy was worse than the Army. Because the Army had some black groups We enlisted people, all black, but the infantry and other units. But the Navy, you can only be a mess attendant, dealing with preparation and serving food. They made him a cook. And at the end of the summer, he was on a destroyer in the North Atlantic. Well, the German submarines were out there, and we were escorting convoys over to England. And they had battles with German submarines. A lot of people didn't know about it, or they didn't write about it, because we would take the ships a certain way in the Pacific, in the Atlantic, and the British ships would pick them up and take them the rest of the way to England. And during that time when we had the convoying the ships, we would fight off German submarines. It all came to a head one time when a German submarine sunk one of our destroyers. Reuben James and 100 and some sailors were killed on that. Hitler didn't want the German submarines to sink American ships. He didn't want America to get into war. But then Pearl Harbor started. Pearl Harbor changed everything. And now we are in a war. So some of my classmates who were over 18, they enlisted, but stayed in school until they graduated. But I turned 17 the same month I graduated, so I was still too young to get in. But I wanted to be with my brother, and I told my father, I say, if you sign a slip for me, I can go into the Navy. And he said, no, I'm not going to sign it, but let's talk about it. And we sat down and he talked about it. I love listening to him. By the time he finished and he explained, you want to be an engineer, you're going to do this, and now you're going to go in the Navy and deal with food and things like that. You can do better than that. By the time he finished, I had no desire to go into the Navy. I read about Tuskegee, and I said, maybe I'll do that. I wanted to go to the Navy too, and what did I do? I ran to the Navy first. I passed the exam, but then they realized who I was, and they failed me. I'm a physical. I want to know why. They said it was my teeth. My wisdom teeth weren't in completely. I went to the dentist. He says, nothing's wrong with your teeth. So then I went up to the Army, and specifically says, no mistake, I want to go to Tuskegee. The Army swore me in as a private in March of '43. And I turned 18 in June, and I got orders to report. And I went to Keister Field, Biloxi, Mississippi, for basic training. We got the L&N Railroad going to Biloxi, Mississippi. We still had a Pullman space, all everyone else in the car was white. But then when we went to the dining car, then we hit segregation for the first time. There were curtains that had certain few tables behind the curtain, and that's when the colored passengers sat. And that was our entrance to segregation in the South. Then we got to Biloxi, Mississippi, and went to Keister Field and found it was even worse. When we were at a place, we were there by ourselves. No whites were with us. We took this training as all the Afro-Americans in the group. See? And then in September, we went to Tuskegee College Training Detachment. Most of the cadets, they could read and write, and they could read and understand. And that's the reason they were able to pass the exams and whatnot. So when they went to school, they can understand what was said. You give them a book and they can understand it. And so the guys I thought were pretty good mentally, the guys in the cadet corps. We became lifelong friends because of the situation we're in. We were always segregated, so we had to turn inward and depend on each other. And we lived at Tuskegee Institute, and we went on there for 3 months. End of 3 months, they terminated it, and we transferred to Tuskegee Army Airfield, Class 44H, pilot training, and we graduated in September 1944. And I got more training and then went to Waldoboro, South Carolina for training in a P-47. We completed training there in early February and shipped overseas. And I was assigned to the 99th Fighter Squadron, 332nd Fighter Group. And I got to fly 21 combat missions. I was still 19 years old then. 21 combat missions over Germany, escorting B-17, B-24 bombers over Germany. I flew as a wingman, a more experienced pilot. You fly as his wing and protect him, whatever he does. You stay behind him to make sure no one gets on his tail. And so that's what I did. If the mission was short, it wasn't too long, when we'd bring the bombers back, we would then go back over Germany and fly around looking for targets of opportunity. Trucks on a highway would shoot those up. Trains would shoot those up, see, to ensure that, particularly the engines, if we can get the engines, knock them out of service. Or barges we just wanted to stop Germany from shipping materials around during the day. So that's the only time I fired my gun. When the war ended, I came back and went to Tuskegee, and it closed in '46, and I got out in November '46. After World War II, we weren't known as Tuskegee Airmen. But later, as the years went on, around the country, they began to form groups of Tuskegee Airmen. And I guess about the '70s, they formed a national group. Our group includes everyone who was at Tuskegee: the cooks, the bakers, the maintenance people, the pilots. And so when you say Tuskegee Airman, it doesn't mean he's a pilot necessarily. It means that he was part of that group that was at Tuskegee. I went to NYU for 1 year, School of Engineering. But then I was recalled to active duty in 1948. Colonel Davis needed pilots up there, so I agreed to go back in. The Air Force became a new service in 1947, September. What had been the Army Air Forces was moved from the Army, that is the personnel, the equipment, moved from the Army and moved up and became the United States Air Force. Well, 7 months later, the Air Force Chief of Staff announced the Air Force was going to desegregate racially. And 3 months later, President Truman signed an executive order for the Army, Navy, and Air Force to submit their plans for racial integration. By the end of June, they deactivated the 332nd at Lockburn. And within a matter of weeks, all the Afro-American people at Lockburn received orders to go to Air Force bases all around the world. Now, when I went back into service in '48, I applied for school, Airborne Electronics Maintenance School at Keesler, Biloxi, Mississippi. And in September, I went down there, and I graduated in August '49. When I graduated in August '49, Lockburn had already been deactivated, and I received orders to the 19 Bomb Group on the island of Guam. When I went into the 19 Bomb Group, I got along well. I was the first African-American in the 19 Bomb Group on Guam. But I got to know a lot of the people, the pilots, whatnot. We got along well. We got a new squadron commander who wouldn't speak to me. He didn't agree with this thing of racial integration. The reason I found out his position is several times I happened to be next to him in the club, whatnot, and started talking to him, and he just turned and walked away. He just wouldn't have anything to say to me at all. So then I decided to stay out of his way. But when we got to Okinawa, our crew started flying missions over Korea. Our first mission was the 30th of June, 1950. The war started the 25th of June, 1950. And the 12th of July, our crew was scheduled for its 7th combat mission. And I'm in the right seat, co-pilot seat, going through my checklist before we get an airplane to take off. And I hear this voice said, "Hardy, get down out of the airplane." It was my squadron commander, Colonel Miller, who pulled me out and replaced me. He didn't want me flying, so he replaced me. It so happened that was the first B-29 shot down over Korea. It was over near Pyongyang, and it was attacked by two yaks. They set an engine on fire, and the crew had to bail out. And most of them got back, but the bombardier and another one were captured by the North Koreans, and the bombardier died in prison camp. And there was some long missions. My longest mission was about 11 hours. So I knew all of Korea, from the northern part to the south. And my last mission was bombing a bridge over the Yalu River because the Chinese were coming across. Ended up flying 45 combat missions in B-29s over Korea. I came home in July 1951 and went to SAC. Strategic Air Command. They had the bombers, long-range bombers. We had the Tactical Air Command, fighters and short-range bombers, but SAC had the long-range bombers. They had B-29s, and then they went to B-47s, B-52s, and B-36s. So I worked a lot on the B-36. That was the biggest bomber we ever had. And they immediately sent me to school for armament, and I'm a fully qualified armor electronic maintenance officer in SAC. And I worked there for a number of years. Then I went to Institute of Technology in 55 to 57, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And I ended up graduating with a Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering. Then I went back to SAC to Japan. One of the best assignments I've had in Japan. I was there for over 3 years. In Japan, I became jet qualified flying and also promoted to major. In 1960, I went to Plattsburgh, New York. I was with a air refueling wing, and I was a major in a maintenance squadron. My wing commander was that same colonel, now full Colonel Miller, who wouldn't speak to me on Okinawa and pulled me off the airplane. He was now my commander again. And I will say that the 2.5 years under him the second time are two of the best years of my career. But, as luck would have it, the Air Force Institute of Technology got to me and wanted me to go to a graduate level school. And graduated in '64 with a Master of Science degree in Systems Engineering - Reliability. So now I had my second degree from the Air Force Institute of Technology. In 1965, I promoted to Lieutenant Colonel. And in the summer of '66, I became Chief of Engineering and Program Manager for the 490L Overseas Audubon Switches Program. It was DoD's first worldwide direct dial telephone system. And I had the overseas portion. The switches would come in at different times, a total of that we had. The first 4 in Europe and 1 in Panama were cut over in June of 1969. And then the others would come in time after that. But I didn't get to the end of it because the end of '69, they were looking for pilots to fly a 119. And so I had to leave at the end of '69 and had to go refresher course in the 119 and had to go to survival school and all of that. Then went to Vietnam for 1 year. Our squadron was at Phan Rang in the southern part of Vietnam, but all of the airplanes were at 2 forward operating locations, one at U in Thailand and one at Da Nang. When I got over, they took my crew away from me and gave it to a captain and made me the commander up at Udon for 3 months. And I flew up over northern Laos looking for trucks coming through, fly at night, picking up targets with infrared equipment and destroying trucks. And I flew a total of 70 combat missions in Vietnam, a total of 136 missions in 3 wars. I came back from overseas in May of 1971. My birthday was in June, so I had to take my physical, and they failed me on my physical. So I retired. My family was still up in Framingham, Massachusetts. We married in '79, and we were married, well, it's about 29 years. I had 4 children. The youngest was about 13 then, and she had a good friend in school. Her friend's father was a high-level manager at GTE Corporation. GTE used to be a big corporation in this country, General Telephone Electronics. When he heard I was going to retire, he made me write my resume. And he took it into them, and he found I was retiring on a Friday, I'd be home, and he had an interview set up for Monday at GTE. And then I went to an interview with them, and they made me a job offer. I worked for them for 18 years in program management. Obama came on the scene running for president in 2008. My wife was alive then. I wasn't paying too much attention to it that year. But she came home with a sticker, Obama. And I said, who's he? She said, he's going to be the president. That's what she said. She heard him say something, and she loved the way he talked. And the way he said things, she thought he was sincere. But she died in April of that year, so she didn't get to see what happened. I drove up to Washington for each of his inaugurals. And I was in the parade the first time. But it was so cold that winter in the parade. I was in some vehicle that we had with some Tuskegee Airmen in it. The second time I drove up again, but there I sat in the crowd. He had a section for Tuskegee Airmen out in front of the platform where he talked. After my wife died, I was looking for something to do, and I got involved with the Red Tail Squadron. And they have a trailer, and they also have a P-51, Red Tail P-51 that flies around the country. That in the trailer, and you can buy a ride in the P-51. Both sides open once they park it, and you can sit about 40 adults or about 50 children in there. And it has 3 screens on one side, and it tells the story of the Tuskegee Airmen. And we try to inspire the kids about flying and whatnot. And you say, anyone can fly, you've just got to learn, pay attention and learn how to do it. And I particularly talk about the girls. It doesn't take strength to fly an airplane. The girls have just as good a chance as doing that. Hopefully I've inspired some of them. We didn't know any other country. We were born and raised here, see. It's our country. And we read history, and you don't read history such as white or black. We read history. We read about the slaves. We read about all of that. Civil War came about, and suddenly we got the right to vote, citizenship. So now you had the rights of everyone else. So the thing is that you figure that the future is going to be better for the kids if things keep going. So we fought, did our best to do our best for our country.